I request Jawhar Sircar to come in, please.
Hello. Thank you all for inviting me to this discussion, though I'm not a professional journalist. Now, the two key issues are, I think, news and noise and the question of being a watchdog or a lapdog. Now, it's hardly worth discussing with anyone. So we all know which way it's going. And I can assure you that these years will not be forgotten. As a student of history, I know that these terrible years will not be forgotten, which means in a way that those who are now conspiring, collaborating, will also not be forgotten. Now, people say that don't exaggerate. Don't exaggerate. Why should 5 or 6 years matter? I said, then why do you read Shri? Shri was in power for only 5 years. And he occupies the whole chapter. So, I mean, let's not belittle history. The reason why it's happening is more important to us. Just a word about Prasar Bharati. Like that obituary notice, we could have one for Prasar Bharati. There were some good chaps who tried, and there were lousy ones. But then it was completely converted after 2014. It was pretty well during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's regime because he was more tolerant. Now, having said that, why I'm saying Prasar Bharati is not worth discussing, though I know that Jan Prasar is intrinsically connected to Prasar Bharati's the public broadcaster being fair and neutral, is that it's converted its name rather surreptitiously to Prachar Bharati right now, but then it has a lot of competition. It has a lot of competition from Sudarshan TV, from Republic TV, from lots of other channels who go more overboard. Now, having said that, let's move on to why it's happening. Now, apart from the compulsion that Ram mentioned about ED and CBI, having worked for the government, I know how subtly and not so subtly government uses its hegemonic powers. Even liberal governments have used them. But then the absolute precision with which the torpedoes are being fired and the attacks are being launched, and the mercilessness with which the executive powers are used leads completely new dimensions to the story of the Indian Republic. I mean the Indian Republic, not the other one. The compulsions are there. There are compulsions on editors, on advertisers and others, and everyone knows about it. We can't document it, but we know about it. But then we cannot also deny that there's an audience for it. There is an audience. That large numbers who voted, hopefully truthfully without the EVM playing foul, the large numbers that have voted somebody for the second time indicates that there is support for this sort of mentality, this sort of articulation. There is support, and we can't deny it. So to some extent, this is happening because the channels, the newspapers and others are also playing to the gallery. It's a different matter altogether that this stems from irrationalism, and irrationalism stems from an excess of the liberal, rational attitude to life. And what causes these malaise to come up? There's a different matter. The fact is that we have a large audience waiting for the Riya Chakrabarti, the Sushant Singh Rajput type of news. In fact, it's going so bad that one of these days, Arnab or somebody will say, oh, so Sushant took drugs, so let's get him arrested as well. Oh, sorry, we are discussing him, we are defending him. It's all getting around in circles. But the point is that there is a large audience who want to lap up. And this we cannot, this is what I call the Coliseum style of politics. First, you put in the gladiators, they fight each other and somebody puts a thumbs up and thumbs down. Then you put gladiators versus lions. Then you put lions versus human beings who are to be eaten, and it goes on endlessly unless somebody interjects. Yesterday, a court, I think the Bombay High Court, asked, don't you have regulations? Now, I have served also as Information and Broadcasting Secretary, again for no fault of mine. And I know that there are instruments available with government which are not being used. The permission to Sudarshan TV to go in for that terrible insult to the minority community is an indication. And after that, I believe the High Court has also come in. Now, so the question is that there is a market for the irrational, for the sensational. Otherwise, how do you think World Wrestling Federation and the boxing matches and everything goes on? It goes on because people love to see other people getting slaughtered. But the point is, society in the form of state organs need to bring in a certain amount of regulation. Otherwise, it is open obscenity. It is open obscenity. That has to be regulated. There is a genetic propulsion, there is a genetic urge within the press and the judiciary that I have seen for 45 years, 42 years in service, to question the executive. And I assure you, having been on the other side, it has acted as a check on the executive, or that part of the executive that is hegemonic by nature. Now, that genetic urge is being suppressed. And therefore, the rage circus that is going on is also the escape through a safety valve. Now, noise is getting TRP. The Lapdog is more popular. So we have come to a pass where there's a bend in the trend of the Indian media. There are online media. There are, I know, at least 5 channels that are fighting it out. Then we have the mainstream media like Ram's Hindu, the Telegraph, Anand Bazar. But of course, they have another side also on the AVP. So there are, and NDTV, who are fighting it out. So why I started with history and why I'll end with history is that history is watching us. History is watching us. There was a movie called What Did You Do in the War, Daddy? History is watching us, and history will watch us. Who were the ones who capitulated to the forces of darkness and who stood up? I already have 2 criminal cases filed in some odd place where I'm spending a lot of money. But that sort of pressure will always be there. So my summation is that this noise and this lapdog tendencies are emanating from a particular reservoir. And we need to go back to that reservoir to understand why it's all happening. And all of it is not compulsion. That is my last statement. There's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of gains that people get. And we need to get deeper into it. That's all. Thank you very much. You see, this interesting point that you raised about EMMC. EMMC is almost an undercover agency. It has monitors monitoring all that's important in television and keeping records. The purpose is very innocent in the sense that if somebody makes a complaint, and one can always go back to those tapes. But then it was during my time that I found a different mentality sort of creeping in, new people coming in, many of them from a background of an ideology coming in and setting up this, utilizing the EMMC as an arm of state power. That was not the intention. The EMMC or a watchdog body that keeps records of the important TV channels is required. But that has to be guided by a neutral body. Now, neutrality was hardly there in Prasar Bharati. And as you know, I was not, I was hardly on talking terms with the then minister for about 2 years because of obvious reasons. And that was a Congress minister. A good person on the whole, but he had his interest and I had my duties. So we got. Now the question is, if Prasar Bharati itself was continuously sabotaged, continuously destroyed and systematically destroyed, and here I can give you one assurance, more than the politicians, it is the bureaucrats of the IAS that played a major role in demolishing Prasar Bharati. The Ministry of Information and Broadcasting ensured that Prasar Bharati that Prasar Bharati was a disadvantaged child, a polio child, or whatever we call it. So it's the while we have our share of grievances against the political hegemonists, the question is the bureaucracy has its own games to play, and usually they are not under so much strict watch. So the fact that Prasar Bharati was made to fail, it was made to fail. EMMC is being made to be utilized. Let's put it like that. They all have to go in for self-regulatory bodies. There's no other way out.
Yeah.
These 20 years that private television has come of age, various models have been tried out. I am dead against any governmental intervention. I know the genetic propulsion, the genetic urges that come within the political class and the bureaucratic class to hegemonize at the drop of a hat, to utilize this. And as Ram has put it, this is the worst time to think of any regulation that has even a fingerprint of government anywhere, because it will be twisted, gnarled, and put out of shape. Now, self-regulation is the only way out, but self-regulation has to come when there's a critical mass. There was an issue that was raised in the self-regulatory television body, and that the tantrum boy of Indian television, who says "Mere paas ye hai, maa hai," and others hai, he said, "I'm going to set up a new self-regulatory body. I'm going to set up a new council." Now, in such a situation, you cannot function. So there has to be some gravitation of certain forces, professional ethics that come in, and there's a high degree of professional ethics that I have encountered, not necessarily the pleasant way, but 4 decades in government means we've been at the receiving end, and you admire them for their professionalism. Now, there is a lot of professionalism still within the media that is not being able to come out. I strongly feel that a couple of indications of which way the wind is blowing would tip the scales. There's already a good indication that's come out on the last Man Ki Baat. The number of people who have disliked it versus there were 10 times more or 8 times more than the number of people who liked it. So you require a lot of these indications, because it is these indications of the public mood that would encourage people to return to their bold or questioning selves. And even the owners would see the logic in going a bit towards vox populi. I mean, that's my way.
Yeah. No, actually, this, when this Man Ki Baat was started, this was, I think, on the 14th of October 2014. I was invited by All India Radio to speak on it. And this program went, you were the CEO of Prasar Bharati. So it went live on the night program, just after the English news. And then I was asked, do you think it will make an impact? So I said the mandarins in Shastri Bhavan will start looking at radio now, and that's all. Otherwise, will it make a transformative impact on with the Prime Minister talking on radio? And it's virtually a soliloquy. There's no interaction. You see, somehow our Prime Minister avoids any interaction with either journalists or with people live. Anyway, that's another matter. So there's another question which probably quickly uh, Jawhar can answer. This is from Devesh Sham from Nagarkoil. What exactly is the contraption called TRP in TV channels? How is it manufactured and manipulated?
No, I don't think TRP can be manipulated. It was. We had another organization before this industry organization came in. We had one private organization that was that had limited number of meters and would be tilting scales in favor of whoever was more pleasant with them, but not anymore. The BARC has a certain amount of credibility, though it requires a lot of penetration. The more the penetration, the more the capture of data. BARC is an industry-run body, though there are whispers that the more powerful houses get to influence policy a little more. But then it's a far greater improvement over what we had, what I inherited. I would not like to. It was a Murdoch organization, as usual, that would decide that X has so much TRP, Y has so much TRP. So TRP is not manufactured. TRP comes from the number of people who have opened the television for that program and how long they have watched it. So this is an electronic media, and these can be guided. These can be captured if the intentions are clear. The remedy lies in the sort of media you want. Media is almost like a boat that is floating on the water of the people. It can't rise. It's not a rocket that can rise above the level of the people. Now, that is not to blame the entire distress on the people, because that would be insulting the intelligence of most people. There's a large amount of manipulation that is going on, and manipulation that is getting unchecked. And since the only check we can look forward in these distressing times is the judiciary, a large part of which has suddenly woken up to its responsibilities. There have been good judgments in the recent past or even before. But then there's a reassertion that is very clear in the last couple of months, despite the fact that objective and subjective conditions in the Supreme Court have not changed. So despite that, there's a reassertion of judicial thought. Now, if the judiciary intervenes and says, like it has been saying in this, in the Delhi High Court and the Bombay High Court have been saying in the case of Sudarshan, in the case of Tabligis, in the case of this Riya Chakrabarti, if they start raising these questions, it's child's play to expose. It's child's play to expose fake news. I can assure you, the way alt news rips apart all types of fake news, and 90% of them or 85% of them are attributed only to one party. One party that starts with a little bit of truth and then goes on exploding. Now, unfortunately, we have to take that syndrome into account as the present. They are the conditions as they exist, and there's no point in ranting against it. We need to be conscious of the bias in the system at present. I have a feeling that judiciary needs to be tapped more and more. What can happen? At the worst, they can reject you, as they did in the first case of the migrant labor, yet threw you out and made all sorts of comments. Insensitive comments were made. But then it was the same judiciary that woke up and the same Supreme Court that started issuing more just orders. So we need to have faith. We need the benches differ. We need to have faith, because legislation is no now. No legislation, please. Because whatever legislation exists is being twisted. So the judiciary remains hope, and the hue and cry factor. I have noticed that the hue and cry factor of civil society, the conscious opposition of civil society, does matter. It's not worked so far in the Koregaon case, in the Bhima Koregaon case. It's not worked so far. But I'm sure it will. If it's worked in Tablighi, it's worked, it will come up. We need to be patient on that and make it very clear that our ideals are non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. And we cannot be pushed beyond the point, come what may. This is allowed, and if this message reaches the ruling class, of which I have been an active part for the better part of my life, if it reaches them, it has its own effect. I can assure you it has its own effect. So the remedy lies in a large amount of encouragement from the people, articulation of protest, which I call the hue and cry factor, judicial intervention, and ripping apart, when possible, fake news to the extent possible. Ripping apart and also campaigning that this is all fake and perhaps taking them to prosecution. That's the only way I see. Now,